Welcome to part 2 of my DJI MAVIC 3 review. If you've not seen part 1, you really should watch that first because there's so much that I cover in that, but of course I'm not going to cover in this because I've done it before. I had to split it up into 2 because there is so much to talk about with this drone. Because I talk about 2 other drones in this video quite a lot, I shorten all of their names. This is 3, the Mavic 2 Pro is tuppence, 2p old money tuppence, and the Air 2S, well, she's called Tess. As I said in part 1, 3 is a better drone than tuppence, pretty much in every way. As it should be, it has been 3.5 years. But the thing is, it doesn't really feel like 3.5 years better. And the reason is what DJI brought out in the meantime.
For example, the Mini 2 is an amazing little drone with a much improved image over the first one and keeps under the 250 gram weight limit, which is really important in many countries, although it does lack any obstacle avoidance. The Air 2 was much improved over the original Mavic Air, but Tess, well, she's really set the bar pretty high. All the features of the Air 2, but with a massively improved camera. That's why 3 needs to be a big step up for DJI after the long gap, and especially after the big increase in price. It really needs to offer things that the other drones don't. If you were to single out the most unique feature of 3, it wouldn't be the sensor size, the battery life, the ProRes HQ recording on the Cine version. It would be the strange and fascinating second camera.
A lot of people are calling this a zoom lens. It's not. I mean, DJI calling it a 28 times hybrid zoom lens. It's not. It's 162mm. Our first lens is 24 and second one is 162. It's just the way you get to it. So we have 1 times now, press it again, and we go to 2 times. And then we press it again, and we go to 4 times. So this is just digital zooming. It's when we press that button again, as I just slightly reframe, and then we clean up.
You can digitally zoom in further to what they call 14 and 28 times, but it's really just a 2 and 4 times digital zoom on that small sensor. With the wind, it was pretty hard to keep myself perfectly in frame for this. The end result's pretty atrocious anyway. So this is what DJI call Explorer mode, which you access by clicking the binoculars icon. This switches you to H.264 4K 30p only, with what looks like a normal image profile. So no log and there's no manual exposure control, for now anyway. DJI told me they didn't intend it to be used for actual filming, just as something to use to look for shots. But of course, if you're gonna give us a camera that can record video and take photos, then we're going to use it. Especially when the image is really quite remarkably steady, given such a long focal length on the drone. When I first used it, I just thought it was a pile of junk, as the image quality is such a huge step down from the main camera. But the more I used it, the more I saw the huge creative potential it could offer me, which in turn made it even more frustrating that the quality was so poor. Its half-inch sensor, which is about 7.3 times smaller than the main 4/3 sensor, and an f4.4 fixed aperture lens, the images were never going to match.
So for me to make it a bit clearer so you understand how the different size sensors and the lenses and the f-stops affect the image and what we see, there is really only one person I could call to explain it to you. Unfortunately, my mum wasn't home, so I phoned the Canadian.
Teague and I here, we're crunching the numbers. See this little guy?
Oh, hello, Teague.
This is for you, bro.
This is your brains.
Yeah.
This is the brains of the operation, right?
Exactly. I don't tell anybody. That's why I've been keeping them secret, because I don't want people to know it's the cat doing all the work.
Same with me.
But based on the sensor dimensions you sent over, so the 4/3 camera has a 24 millimeter full frame equivalent, so f5.6 on a full frame camera. And then we also have to do a little bit of work for the ISO if we want to see similar noise profiles. So if you normally shoot, say, ISO 100 on the drone, and the crop factor is 2, it's crop factor squared, so 2 to the power of 2 is 4, 4x ISO 100, so it'd be ISO 400 noise performance. So if we put it all together, that main camera on the drone is like a 24 millimeter f5.6 at ISO 400 full frame equivalent. You'll get a similar image in all ways, depth of field, noise, everything. For the top camera sensor, the zoomy one, if you want to, well, I guess
it's not a zoom lens. It's not.
A telephoto, then. Although it's not actually a telephoto either, unless if you do the equivalent, right? Because it's 162 millimeter full frame equivalent. But based on the sensor dimensions, that should have a crop factor for full frame of about 5.4 times, which puts that lens around 30 millimeters for its, native sensor. If that lens is a f4.4, then the crop factor applied to that would give us a similar full frame depth of field of 23.76, something like that. Let's say f24.
Okay, so that's right. So f4.4 becomes f24. I don't think I've ever shot at f24. Isn't that like with a lens? That's the same as a lens cap going on, right?
Yeah, almost. You just drill a little hole in it.
Yeah.
And then do the same thing for the ISO if you want to know the noise performance, which is probably the most important part for this lens, or the sensor, because if it's 5.4 squared, it's 29.16 multiplier. Yeah, so we'll call it 3000.
Yeah.
ISO 3000.
I mean, the thing is, it's just weird to bring out a camera or to have a drone with two cameras which clearly do not match in the slightest. There is no way to make the top camera match the bottom one. The only thing you can do is make the bottom camera match the top one by degrading the image. Yeah.
You got a worse than your shot, right?
Unless people watch it on your phone, and then it doesn't matter. It all looks great. So
I need to quickly address the fact that my voice will be changing from now on. From this back to as it was, and then back to this again numerous times. I caught the you-know-what, and most of the VO had been recorded by then, and everything on camera had been recorded by then. You'll just have to put up with the fact that it'll keep changing. So Gerald's numbers are all well and good, but how do they actually affect real-world shooting? The only goal is to get the cleanest, best-looking image that we can, and to try and work with its limitations. If there was manual control and we could set our settings to make them exactly the same, their exposure should be identical. I did numerous experiments, and based on the camera settings which are created by the .srt files, I really recommend turning on those. They are called subtitle files, and they give you lots of really important information when you're using the drone. I also used the data from the JPEGs when I took photos. It didn't make things easy. It would change the ISO rather than the shutter speed or vice versa. So a number of calculations were needed to be done. But it worked out that the top camera needed roughly 1 stop more light. This could be down to a number of factors, but most likely it's the lack of optimization of the two sensors to match each other, and also the top lens is most likely plastic, which most cell phone lenses are, and the amount of light that actually reaches the sensor as opposed to what enters isn't going to be exactly the same. So it's a combination of both. What is clear from these simple examples is the difference in image quality between the two is stark.
Despite these limitations and the image being pretty poor quality, I was still determined to try and get the very best results possible, because what I could get with it was so different to anything else I'd ever got from a drone. And that excited me. So these are my tips to get the best from this long lens.
Do not use anything other than the 1x and 7x modes in Explorer. All the others are just digital zooms and look awful. Avoid them. DJI need to put a button on the app to just let you switch between the two cameras, avoiding all the digital zooms. Composition wise, if you want to show movement, then you have to make sure there is something to give a sense of parallax. Otherwise, even when moving, it will look very static. You may also need to fly faster than you would with the main camera to get a sense of movement, but that depends how far away you are from that foreground information. In this shot, I had to fly very slowly as the branches were inches from the lens. Oh, and yes, I broke rule number 1 here. I used the 2x crop of that telephoto lens, which is displayed as 14x. I did it just to see what I could do with it in post, and the moon is very bright, so my exposure settings would be very low. Shoot in good light so you can get your ISO as low as possible. Whilst there's no manual exposure control, there is an exposure lock function, either via touching the screen on the app or to program one of the buttons on your controller to function as this.
This tip is really important. When using ND filters, remember that they cover both cameras with the same strength, but the top camera needs more light. And as you have no control over your camera settings, you need to just make sure that the ND is of a lower strength than you'd normally use if you are planning to use that top camera. You don't want the auto exposure to increase its ISO because you've cut down the light coming in.
My last tip is a big one, and that's to avoid using autofocus, because it's continuous autofocus only, and it is constantly pulsing or changing what it thinks should be in focus. And it's taken me a while to get the best results with this camera, and not using autofocus and locking my exposure have been absolutely key to get those good results. When using manual focus and you think, oh, I'm just going to go to infinity because that's what I'm on very far a distance, it's not always going to be infinity. It's often quite off. And this is the only time I use that 14 and 28 times. I use it like a digital punch in to get my focus spot on. And once I've nailed it, I go back to the normal 7x mode.
I definitely would have preferred to have a less extreme second camera. 75 would have been great, but to squeeze that onto there with a decent size sensor like a 1-inch would have been too much. It's a shame. I mean, I've actually grown to quite like the 162. It's given me a new perspective on what you can see with the drone. It's just wish the quality was better.
Having manual exposure would be great, and also being able to shoot in a flatter profile. It doesn't need to be log, but something flatter than what we have. as I do find that it clips the whites really easily. Oh, and don't limit me to 30p. I don't shoot 30p. Please give us 25p or 24p. Thank you. So DJI, you are going to give us a drone with 2 cameras and something really cool like this. Please try and find a way to make the image quality match. So hopefully these tips will all help you get some half decent results, but just please don't use it to spy on people. In fact, in the early firmware, 3 actually pixelated people's faces on the camera. This has since gone, but clearly they know how this camera might be used by some creepers out there.
Go away, you pervert! Just trying to catch a few rays. Can't get any privacy anywhere these days. Bloody drones everywhere. Luckily it's a wide lens, probably can't see me.
That turned out to be a longer section than I had planned on it being, especially considering it is the least impressive thing about 3, but the most interesting part, which is why it needed to be covered properly. From now on, camera-wise, I will just be looking at the main camera, which is really her best feature. With some caveats, she has a better image than Tuppence and Tess. Well, it's not exactly a big statement. Could you imagine if her image was worse?
The problem with reviews on YouTube is they can get outdated literally the moment you've uploaded it with a firmware update, which could just fix everything. And that could be the case with 3. That's why I've got a checklist in the description so you can see if things have been fixed or if they haven't.
As I feared, and really was quite predictable, when I was exporting this review to go up online tonight, I had a quick look on Facebook and the Mavic 3 group and saw that somebody said there was new firmware. Somebody else said that they'd done it and they couldn't see anything new. So I decided to update anyway, just to double check to see if any of the issues I had with the image had been fixed, because a lot of people wouldn't be looking for those. Started 3 up, had a look, and yeah. Large chunks of this review were suddenly made redundant and I had to redo a lot of the tests. Oh well, it's better that this happened before I'd uploaded a video and clicked publish than just after, eh? Anyway, let's get back to these tests and get back to the main part of the review, because a lot of it is still completely valid and fine. It just won't be as fluid as I would have liked.
So Master Shots is one of the features that came with the new firmware, which was supposed to come out in the end of January. It's not something I've used much in the Air 2S, which also has it, because I'm a kind of a manual flight kind of guy. I think it was also probably in the Air 2 as well. And it just creates all these different shots and we'll put them together. Downside, 4K, I don't even know what frames per second it is. It may well be 30 again. I have no manual exposure control. And I can't shoot in ProRes and I can't shoot in log. I don't know if this is going to be the case moving forward. This is the thing that I've had with 3 since starting reviewing it. I just don't know what is going to change and what isn't going to change. This isn't a huge one for me because I can always do these shots manually if need be. But it would be cool to be able to, have some control over this. But I think it is really designed for people who just want to get things done really quickly and aren't worried about dealing with ProRes HQ and log. I think it's just a different type of user. But it's still very clever. And as long as it doesn't fly into any trees, then that's cool. And I don't see why it should, because I have left enough space. And that is absolutely key, is leaving enough space. So it doesn't do that. I think we're almost done. Takes 2 minutes to do these shots, which is quicker than I could have done it, to be fair. So fair play, 3, fair play.
Like Explore mode, we are stuck in normal colours, 4K 30p only, with no manual control. There is the ability to change our exposure compensation. I think it looks like the white balance gets locked when you start shooting, as well as the shutter speed. It was using the ISO to change the exposure, which is the smoothest way to do this. This mode is either seen as something for lazy bastards who can't be bothered to learn how to fly, or more fairly, it's something that can replicate shots that took me years to master. Look, as it is right now, it is exactly the same as it was when I first used it with the Mavic Air 2. It would be nice to see it evolve into something more, giving us the ability to decide which of the shots to do, how long for, and of course which colour profile and frame rate. Then I could really see myself using it. But if this is all it's going to be, then that's fine. I just think it has the potential to be so much more than just a novelty feature. This is the umbrella name for the 3 key autonomous modes for video: Active Track version 5, Spotlight, and Point of Interest, or POI. 2 of these work really well.
So this is my first attempt at Active Track, now that I've got it on the new firmware, and straight away, I'm disappointed. It doesn't work in ProRes. And now I switch to D-Log and it says, doesn't work in D-Log in H.265. This cannot be the case. No log, no ProRes HQ for Active Track. So I'm now in 5.1K H.265. It's letting me draw a box, but nothing's sticking. Try 4K. Not working in ProRes, not working in H.265, wasn't working in 5.1K, so now in 4K H.265. Please work. Ah! There we go. Marvellous.
This was a bit shocking, but DJI have assured me that log and ProRes are coming, and they are working on 5.1K, which makes it sound like it's further off. Is this a big deal? Well, there is a substantial difference in how 5.1K and 4K look, but I'll get onto that later. POI is a really useful mode, a way of selecting a subject and doing perfect moves around them at an adjustable speed. And yeah, as for all autonomous modes, please turn on obstacle avoidance. I've used POI occasionally on other drones, but I really am kind of a control my own sticks kind of guy. Spotlight mode is my favourite mode here. You lock onto your subject and then you fly manually, with 3 making adjustments to make sure your subject stays in the same place that you set to be in the frame. I used this on tests a few times when filming myself, and it feels much better here. It doesn't seem to keep going up high when it gets closer to me. Maybe it's my imagination. But yeah, I was pretty impressed. There were a few times it got stuck, but I would rather it got stuck than crash. It's a great way of maintaining your composition, of being safe, and being in control. Active Track 5.0 based on this current firmware is not so impressive. I don't think it's as much of an issue with the APAS sensors, but more of an AI thing. In this mode, again, you select your subject and you choose from which direction you want 3 to follow you, and then click go. First off, it immediately goes too high for me. I also don't seem to be able to set a distance from me that I want. It was always too close. I know it needs to be of a certain distance to make sure it can still pick you up. Only the rear following mode seemed to really give me half decent results. But even then it wasn't what I would call smooth.
We have Active Track and it does have the omnidirectional sensors. It can include actually you walking forward and it being in front of you, which is a hell of a challenge because it's not going to know what I'm going to do. I'll give it a try. Click go. It's pretty challenging around here. That's not a good start. Yeah, it doesn't like twigs much. Yeah. well, that wasn't so good, was it? Dead props. Wow, yeah, I think it's all right. Jesus Christ. Well, that was shit.
Front tracing was a disaster, which didn't surprise me at all, as that's a really challenging thing to do. The AI needs to figure out which way the subject is going to move and then preempt that by moving first. I mean, I didn't even know where I was going to go myself. I found it really overreactive, wildly flying all over the place, especially when it felt like it was losing me. It was quite scary because it looked like it was just going to crash constantly. You know, with social media, when you share stuff and people say, well, what do you expect? What do you think it's going to do in a situation like that? That's far too unrealistic, testing it in those woods. You should be out in a wide open space. Well, to me, there's a very simple reply to that.
Multiple visual sensors enable accurate recognition of objects omnidirectionally. That means Mavic 3 can automatically sense and avoid obstacles during flight, even when moving sideways and backwards. This also allows ActiveTrack 5.0 to be more advanced than ever before, providing safe and reliable tracking even of fast-moving subjects in complex environments. Providing safe and reliable tracking even of fast-moving subjects in complex environments.
This isn't going to sound particularly nice, but there were times that 3 was acting like a drunk driver. Even just hovering whilst I was stationary. She was rocking backwards and forwards like she'd had 18 cups of espresso, or something worse. Comparing to how she was in Spotlight, there's just no comparison. DJI urgently need to address the issues with ActiveTrack.
I just don't think it's ready yet. I think they've rushed it out. I think maybe they're under a bit of pressure. And I certainly am not going to be using it until I know that it's rock solid. This is the sort of feature that really needs to be rock solid if you're going to be using it. It's different when it comes to, oh, my image is a bit noisy. That's fine. But if your obstacle avoidance and your tracking isn't working and you're flying into a tree, then yeah, that's a bit different. So for now, I'm just going to not use it and just fly manually, because 3 deserves that sort of thing. And I love flying manually anyway, because it's much more my kind of thing. So DJI will fix this and make it a lot better. So do check the description. I will update it when things are improved. But if you are going to give it a try, just do it. Just be very cautious, okay?
I did cover autofocus in part 1, but I've discovered a few new things about it, so I want to share them with you. Because of the larger sensor, when you are out of focus, it is obviously going to be much more visible. And when you're flying with subjects in the foreground, 3 has a habit of focusing on those things, especially if they are much more prominent in the frame than your subject, even if you've touched your subject on the screen. This happened in a piece of camera that I did actually use early in this video, which you may or may not have spotted. This wasn't my favourite take of this piece of camera, but it was the one with the least issue with the autofocus. For situations when it's not about foreground information, stopping down will definitely make things look less obvious, but I really do like flying wide open, because when I am close to things, they do clearly look out of focus when your focus point is in a distance, and it does make the image look more high-end. So much like when I'm using the top camera, it does seem that manual focus combined with focus peaking is my best bet. I'm not talking about pulling focus or anything, but just setting a single focus point and leaving it there. The problem is 3 is either manual focus or continuous autofocus. Tuppence has 2 autofocus modes, continuous and single points. DJI, please give us AFS on 3. She needs it. A quick word on the adjustable aperture of 3 and Tuppence. This is one of the key features that they have over TESS. It's not about depth of field, it's about controlling your exposure in the air.
not having to adjust your shutter to compensate, or worst case, have to actually come down and change your ND. The standard Mavic 3 can shoot in H.265 and H.264 up to 5.1K, and the Cine version can also do this, but it can do ProRes HQ as well. I noticed online some people are calling this Cine. It's Cine, surely. Oh, doesn't matter.
Mavic 3 Cine uses
Cine, not
Center.
And these are the approximate bit rates for them when shooting in 25p. I'm not going to go through every single frame rate. Don't let the numbers trick you. H.265 is higher than H.264 as it is older and less efficient. As you can see, ProRes HQ file sizes are, frankly, ridiculous. And they do cause immense workflow headaches, both when filming and offloading, which I go into detail about in part 1, so make sure you watch that. Just as a side note though, I have done some additional testing when offloading 3's full 1TB SSD at home to the internal SSD of my Mac, and also to a fast external one. And I have managed to bring it right down to 23 minutes, which I think is just under half of what I was getting before. But it's kind of irrelevant because I still have to transfer footage to my larger hard drive so I can actually work on it. Now, I did come up with an idea which might be possible, and if it was, it would really help with the huge problem of getting your footage off of 3 between battery changes. Because if you aren't already doing this with your micro SD cards, why the hell not? Always swap out your cards when you come down, just in case something happens to your drone and all your footage is still on there. If you've shot, say, 200 gigabytes of footage with one battery, which is actually quite easy to do, especially if you're shooting at 5.1K 50p, with a fast SSD, that would take a few minutes to offload. But most people aren't going to carry a laptop around with them whilst flying and set it down on the ground so you can do a quick backup. But there doesn't seem to be any obvious reason to me as to why you couldn't directly plug in that SSD into 3. But if DJI made a new feature in the app, so it recognised this external SSD as a device, you could go into the playback section, select the clips that you want to offload, and then transfer them to the SSD. For me, this could be the solution that would make me record in ProRes HQ again. Although I wish they'd put in lower versions of ProRes. Anyway, there's my idea, DJI. My gift to you. HLG will come along with new firmware at some point, and I expect it will be 10-bit. But I've never really liked it in previous DJI drones. I always recommend shooting in D-Log whenever 3 will let you. Get the best dynamic range, and in 5.1K, the least processed image. The difference between the ProRes HQ, H.265, H.264 vlog are so minuscule that I couldn't even point them out to you. 3's D-Log is much more loggy, I'm sure there's a proper word for that, than the one in Tuppence and Tess. The flatter, the better, I say, and it's a piece of cake to bring to life that flat image with DJI's official Rec 709 LUT, or maybe there's some people out there who've made their own LUTs for sale, who knows. And with that you have the ability to adjust your exposure, your highlights, your shadows, stuff that the normal profile gives you very little ability to do. Oddly, right now, the Color Display Assistant, which lets you view Rec 709 on your screen while shooting log, is currently missing in 3. It was there before launch. I am 100% certain that this is temporary and it will come back. All the resolutions and frame rates are 10-bit when shooting in D-Log. ProRes HQ is also 422. H.264 and H.265 are 420, but don't worry about that. You're not going to be doing any green screen work, are you? The important part here is the 10-bit. Unfortunately, when you switch to the normal profile, unless you record in ProRes HQ, so you're recording in H.264, H.265, your recordings are all going to be 8-bit 420. That is pretty much the biggest advantage of having the Cine version. You can shoot in the normal profile in 10 bits, only in ProRes HQ. Now this is not a new thing, Tuppence and Tess are the same. There is no reason for this to be the case. And also, we are forced to use normal color profile. Well, we don't want to, but we have to, down to limitations with 3. So yeah, I consider this to be a bit of a problem. But even if they make the normal profile 10-bit for H.264 and H.265, it doesn't help with the other big problem that the normal color profile has.
So many camera companies really oversharpen their image, but DJI's drones have been doing this for ages, especially the smaller ones, the cheaper consumer ones. You had the ability to adjust the sharpening in a Mavic Pro and a Mavic 2 Pro, and that was nice to have, although it's a little bit mushy, especially on the Mavic Pro. But it is an important thing to have, and we don't have the ability anymore on the Mavic 3. It's gone. Mavic Pro had it, Mavic 2 Pro had it, Mavic 3 and Mavic 3 Cine do not have any ability to change your sharpening.
The normal color mode is very oversharpened in all resolutions, all codecs. These are all screen recordings with peaking turned on, different strengths, different resolutions and profiles. Yeah, log isn't going to show as much peaking as the normal profile, but it still makes a difference. You can still really tell that this is a shot that I had with the color assist mode on with peaking set to high. You'll also notice that when I switched from 5.1K to 4K, it's even worse. And that's in all codecs and profiles, and even log. Part of this can be attributed to the 4K being oversampled from 5.1K, which will give it a slightly more detailed image, but it's not that, it's something else, and I'll get into that in a bit. I understand that punchy, high contrast, oversharpened images are appealing to the average consumer, but is that really an excuse to remove the ability for us to adjust it in 3? When you're reducing the sharpness, you're not blurring the image, you're simply reducing the amount of in-camera processing. And you can easily add that back in post if you really want to.
The other thing about the normal color profile is it doesn't have the dynamic range, as you could expect, of D-Log. Combining that with the oversharpened image, and unless you're recording in ProRes, you're going to be 8-bit, which is a shame because the colors are really nice, but the image quality is compromised too much. So I do recommend just shooting in D-Log. Just put a lot on it and it'll look much the same.
An in-between profile like D-Cine-like, as we had in the OG and Tuppence, is sorely missing. But we also need the ability to have control over our image. It's simply not acceptable in a drone at this price point, and especially as the previous models had this.
I've no idea why they've removed it. It makes no sense. I'm just hoping that it's a firmware issue in this early one. It's going to have it. I can only hope. Because in previous drones, they've used the line when I've spoken about it is their consumer drones for the cheaper ones. This is still a consumer drone by their definition, but not with the price that it is at. And with the Mavic 2 Pro and the Mavic Pro both having that ability, it makes no sense. And they really need to sort this out. Please, DJI.
Although I've had pretty good success recently in reducing the oversharpening of the image from many of DJI drones using Topaz Labs Video Enhance AI. Video Enhance is an amazing piece of software, and the results have at times been miraculous. Not just on oversharpening, but really for the upscaling and cleaning up of old video. I still use Neat Video for straight noise reduction as it works very well, has more fine-tuning ability, and is way faster. I find Topaz works really well for dealing with compression and lack of detail and over-sharpening issues. It's just very slow.
On some really bad looking footage, I've really been blown away at times. I keep saying I'm going to make videos and I never do, but I will be making a dedicated video next year all about this marvellous piece of software and how I use it for all sorts of footage. Please remember that sharpness and detail are two very different things. Have a look at this video that I made. It explains it very well. You see, life is full of detail. It's not full of over-exaggerated edges.
You may notice in that earlier piece of camera, 2 3s. Yes, I have a replacement for my original 3 because I have the production model now. And I was supposed to send the original 3 back, but I decided to hang on to her until this review was finished, just in case, and I'm glad I did. Because now I can do these tests with the image and particularly the noise and compare the new firmware with the firmware that I filmed the rest of the review with and see just how substantial these changes are. Otherwise it's just like, I think it's different, but I'm not quite sure. Whereas here, I can definitely tell. It's just a shame because those tests I'd done were really nice and they were really good and they showed so much. I spent so much time working on them. And now I've just got to redo them. Oh, well, at least I'm at home and it's warm and it's dry.
Prior to the firmware update, the noise that 3 had in every profile, resolution and codec was problematic. Although the contrasty normal profile did hide most of the issues until you really pushed the ISO up. The 5.1K had a weird green blotchy pattern in all codecs, making it near impossible to fix, but now looks so much better. 4K was very magenta in all codecs originally, and strangely had heavy noise reduction applied in H.265 and H.264, but not in ProRes HQ, which was thankfully untouched. The H.265 4K is now less magenta, the noise reduction is still there, and even worse, they've added it to the ProRes HQ 4K, so now they both look identical. I know this is over pixel peeping, but doesn't the ProRes HQ 4K look more oversharpened than the H.265 now? I think it does. The really daft thing is if I took the old 4K and just reduced the magenta, it looked better than this does. This is not a good thing. It's had a substantial impact on the image. And it was until now, for me, one of the only reasons, the only other reason, to shoot ProRes HQ. The other one being the normal profile, being able to record in 10-bit. But now we're just left with the latter. When you use noise reduction like Neat Video in post, you do so because you've had to push your exposure past where the sensor works cleanly. It's something you do shot by shot with delicacy and finesse, because if you get it wrong, it can look awful. You don't apply noise reduction to well-lit exposed footage. Unfortunately, in all 4K modes on 3, it's on full blast in every codec, picture profile, and ISO with this current firmware. That's why the peaking level was increasing when I went into 4K from 5.1K in the normal color and log. When you add noise reduction, you add post-sharpening to compensate, and that's what they've done here. And it absolutely doesn't need it at these lower ISOs. There's definitely some benefits at the higher ISOs, don't get me wrong. Noise reduction removes detail, so this is not a good thing. And this brings us to a sort of temporary workaround. If you are shooting in 4K D-Log, always shoot at 800 ISO, as the noise can mask some of that noise reduction and that clinical image. A little bit. It's better than nothing.
You just got to accept in video, on 3, the camera has to process the image to get something acceptable out of it. It's just the difference of the processing that you get between the 5.1K and the 4K is a shame. What you want from your cameras is for every mode to match.
As much as I like sitting in the middle of a field with a puddle, with people walking past me with their dogs and wondering what the hell is wrong with this man, I think it's time to stop these over-the-top obsessive tests. I think you get the point. There's some inconsistencies. And they are obviously fixable. And maybe they've been fixed already. And maybe all of this was a complete waste of time. That would be depressing.
the sun's gone down, it is getting darker. I'm in D-Log. I'm recording H.265 and it's ISO 800. It's underexposed, as you can see, and that's as far as I can go. So this firmware, I don't understand. This is the real problem, and this has to be fixed, because prior to this, the firmware that came out on launch day took away my ability to go higher. I was shooting at 6400 ISO with D-Log, and yes, whilst it was noisy, I could clean it up with neat video. I'm not even given the opportunity here. This is as high as I can go. If I want to go higher, I go into the normal profile.
And then I'm stuck in a high contrast, oversharpened, for most people, 8-bit profile, which I cannot adjust, which is not what I want at all. I can go up to ISO 6400 here, and yes, it looks noisy as you would expect. I mean, this is what I found quite funny when 3 was announced. People saying this is going to be a low light beast. It is a 4/3 sensor camera, and when have these been famous for having low light performance? Well, apart from the dual ISO 10 megapixel sensor that we have in cameras like the Panasonic GH5S. This is the pre-release firmware at 6400 ISO in D-Log at 5.1K. And sadly, the only shot I got, because I didn't know that the new firmware coming out the next day would remove it. And a little bit of work in post, it looks great. A lot of people mistakenly say you should not shoot log when filming at night. Well, that's nonsense. This is incredibly challenging dynamic range. So use log. Well, if your camera will let you. But with log limited to just 800 with 3, you really can't see much. You can, of course, push your exposure up in post. In 5.1K, you're going to see a lot of noise, but you can clean it up a fair bit with neat video now that that noise pattern has become much more even. And it definitely looks better than the normal profile at 6400 ISO. In 4K at ISO 800 in D-Log with that default noise reduction, you can actually make things look really good in post, to a point. In this shot I pushed it up by about 3 stops. I did also shoot at a 25th of a second for a lot of these, which I would only do if things aren't moving much. And to be honest, I was moving a bit too much for that shutter speed, so the motion blur isn't ideal, but it did give me an extra stop of light. Now whilst this looks pretty good, the problem is it looks pretty good in post. While shooting, you can barely see anything on the screen. Hence, I would like to see higher ISOs in log, please. And I'm not talking about night flying, I'm just talking about just generally lower light conditions. I don't get this 800 ISO cap, and I hope DJI rectify it. This is going to be a very short chapter, as I actually haven't taken many photos with 3, sorry. The ones from the main camera obviously look better than the ones from the top camera. As of right now, the panorama modes aren't there. I don't really use them that much. I prefer to do mine manually. Although I would actually quite like them to put in a top-down panorama mode where 3 actually fly in a grid pattern to get some lovely bird's eye views of a much larger field of view. Because obviously you are limited by a 24mm lens and your 120 meter height restriction. There is actually an official wide-angle adapter coming out from DJI, which is going to give an equivalent of 15.5mm. I haven't used it, but I'm definitely going to get one. Mostly for those top-down shots, but also when I want that really lovely wide perspective. I did a couple of really rubbish hyperlapses after getting the new firmware, and you can program it to do different types of moves and different lengths of times. It's incredibly boring, you just sit and wait for it, but that's time-lapse for you.
Video synthesis completed.
And then when it's finished, it will create a video file for you, which is strangely HEVC 3840 by 2160, which is a lot less than the resolution of the original photos, which is why I saved the original raw photos as well.
The video file that's created also has electronic stabilization added onto it. So there's another reason why you should make sure you keep your raw photo so you have full control over your end hyperlapse.
One thing that is really disappointing is how much you can manually pan the gimbal yourself via the app. So by pressing the screen and then moving left or right, in previous drones, you've been able to pan the gimbal quite a lot. With Tess, you can pan almost 80 degrees in each direction. Tuppence isn't far off with 75 degrees, but poor old 3, she's practically in a neck brace with just 5 degrees in each direction. You can see why, because she's got such a big bonce, even though the camera sticks out more than the other drones. Just because of the size of that gimbal is bigger, we have these limitations.
It's not a feature I use that much, but it is nice to be able to look around without having to actually move the craft around. It's a very practical thing to have in Tess because she has no side sensors, so you can fly forward safely and still point off in one direction. But on the flip side, we do have this amazing ability to tilt up way higher than I've seen on any other drones, which is absolutely fantastic. Without that, I wouldn't be able to get shots like this. And a big part of that is her camera does stick quite far forward, and so the props don't get in the way. If I was going to single out one feature over the past 5 years that DJI brought into their drones and was the biggest, I'm going to say this phrase, game changer, then it will most definitely be tripod mode, which they brought out with the original Mavic Pro. All the drones since that, and even a couple which were updated, which came out before it, had tripod mode. It gave us a flying mode with a really wonderful top speed of just 1 meter a second. And it opened up the ability to safely and precisely control my drone so I could easily replicate classic camera moves like jib and crane shots, dolly and track shots, as well as more complicated shots because after all it's a drone, which you would normally need to use something like a techno crane for. It was amazing, but then with the Mavic Air 2 in 2020, they replaced it with Cine mode. Yes, Cine, not Cinna. And they said it was superior to tripod mode. Well, how can something be superior if it's not the same thing? It now had a maximum speed of 5 meters a second. Yes, that's 5 times faster, which made it just too fast for delicate moves, and it also made the sticks too sensitive. Now, to try and get tripod mode like results with Cine mode, you have to be really gentle on the sticks. But even then, it's incredibly hard to keep them at a really perfect, consistent slow speed, which is the key to getting successful cinematic camera moves. And it's also so easy to accidentally move a stick a bit too far, and because it's fast, it results in a crash. Since the Mavic Air 2 came out, I've repeatedly asked DJI to please make the Cine mode top speed adjustable from 1 meter a second to 5 meters a second for people who like the new mode, but for also people like me who really miss the old tripod mode. I really thought I was making progress at one point, but the last time I asked, which was just before the release of 3, I got a very simple reply. Cine mode has replaced tripod mode, and it felt like this was the final word on the subject from them. I tried to explain how different they were and how much safer it was to have a tripod mode, but nothing made a difference. Not having this in the otherwise wonderful Tess really distressed me so much that I even made a dedicated video after my review where I made my own slow sticks so I could have less responsive, dampened ones with less travel to try and recreate tripod mode in a physical way. Actually, in the same video, I also made my own diffusion filters to try and combat the oversharpening of the image in certain modes that DJI refused to address. And both my solutions worked out really well. So much so that Freewell themselves sent me some proper diffusion filters based on what I'd made,
And then they've gone on to make their own variable ND mist versions, and I believe there is one coming out for 3. My sticks work really well and even gave me the ability to be slower than 1 meter a second if I wanted to, but I could easily just flick them up and go to normal mode. It also inspired others to make and sell their own slow sticks. So clearly a demand was there. Tripod mode was being missed. I couldn't believe it when 3 came out, and she was the same as Tess. Also, as I had the new RC Pro, my slow sticks didn't work with them. It wasn't the different spindle that's the problem, but the whole mechanism on them. I kept being told to calibrate my sticks. And the thing is, the RC Pro sticks are really sensitive.
So I switched to the standard controller because I can use my slow sticks and get some really controlled shots, which I just can't seem to do with the RC Pro and the lack of tripod mode. And these are really good. These are, it's just a stick on here. I don't know who sent it to me, but hopefully I found out and the name is there. He doesn't sell them, but I think he should. They're really cool.
DJI have added the ability to change the expo settings, but they haven't put in the sensitivity settings that the OG and Tuppence have, which are all in those same controls. But it does give you the ability to change the initial responsiveness. But even at the lowest point, it's still not the same because the speed doesn't change and there's nothing like tripod mode. But although I did have an idea of using this in combination with some elastic bands.
By changing these settings in the advanced tab, I am able to get this much more delicate control. It's not quite tripod mode, but it's pretty good because you can still go fast if you push hard, but you do need to push harder on the sticks for it to respond, and that does make controlling it much easier.
I'm going to keep on trying to make some slow sticks for the RC Pro. I've got a couple more ideas. It's just, I don't think DJI are going to budge. They haven't budged on anything that I've asked over the years, whether it comes to sharpness or tripod mode. I don't know if this is going to help, but there's nothing to lose. So I started a petition to ask DJI if they could make their cine mode adjustable speed from 1 to 5 meters a second. Please, can you sign this and forward it on? If enough people sign it, maybe, just maybe, they might actually do something about it.
I'll be here when you come back to me. When you come back to me. When you come back to me.
I know I'm not the only one who thinks of drones as cameras first and how they can create these classic movements. Whilst browsing Skillshare, the sponsor of this video, I came across this very interesting course on using drones by Oliver Astrologo. I think I said that right. And in the course he has some very wise words.
Do some nice slow movements and take some good shots to start. In most cases, the simplest movements, like dolly shots or maybe a simple movement of the drone forward and back, will be the more effective one. Technology is making big step ahead, and probably in the future there will be drones that will be more efficient, more easier to use. But despite the technology that you're going to use in the future, what is making your content to stand out is the creativity, is the way that you are approaching your content.
Skillshare is a fantastic resource with so many varied courses which I am currently taking, and there's always new ones being added. The first 1,000 subscribers who click the link in the description below will get a free 1-month trial. And I challenge you all to make a better hedgehog than me.
So why was 3 the hardest and most complicated drone review I've ever made? If you've not skipped the rest of this video to just get to this bit, then you'll know a lot of the reasons. The main reason though is pretty simple. It was released too soon. I've reviewed and bought many products which weren't fully ready on release. but 3 has felt more like a work in progress than anything else I've used. So why did they release it so early? Well, the holiday period is obviously an important time for companies like DJI, but just how many people were getting DJI MAVIC 3 and 3 Cines under their Christmas tree as presents? Lucky people. If any product that should be pretty much 100% ready to go with only improvements coming as firmware, that really should be a drone. Going on sale with so many missing key features is one thing, but for many of the main things to just not be up to scratch is something else. You can definitely use the argument that products get refined and improved over time, and 3 will certainly get there for most things. But DJI aren't a new company. It's not like this is their first drone. Out of the block, 3 should have been near perfect in every way. If she wasn't, what's the rush? We've waited 3.5 years for her. We could have waited a bit longer, but then there's the more fundamental things, the choices that they've made. I've already stated that I think 3 is a great drone and is better in almost every way than Tuppence, but not every way. When I first started reviewing 3, I was really impressed with the image, with the larger sensor, and especially the battery life, 2 of the most important things. But as time went on, I started to go much deeper, and it struck me that 3 didn't feel like 3 at all. She felt more like an Air 2S Pro, if you will. Let me explain that. 3 almost improves on everything that Test does. The only thing right now that is not as good is the weird image issues between the main video resolutions that 3 has. Test doesn't have any of this. Because 3 is missing so much of what Tuppence has, that's why I didn't feel that it was so much as a next model, if you know what I mean. Especially after 3.5 years. Here are some of the missing features that have stood out to me, and I'm sure I've missed some. Tripod mode, the sensitivity and gain of sticks, image control, AFS, adjust the battery percentage before return to home kicks in, the ability to broadcast live, the ability to pan the gimbal head more than 5 degrees, clip names that can be set to continuous rather than resetting each time you format, and recording audio from the phone controller with proxies. A big thing is the controller. Whilst I love this standard controller that it comes with, it really isn't appropriate for the follow-up to the Mavic 2 Pro. It's pretty much the same one that ships with the Mini 2 after all. This is a very basic controller with barely any features, buttons and controls on it at all. The Mavic 2 controller has its own screen packed with information if your phone should die. It also has loads of customizable buttons and dials. Shouldn't it be at least the same grey as 3? This controller just seems like an afterthought, like they were really just hoping people would buy the RC Pro. On the subject of the RC Pro, which I do think is excellent, why is there no microphone on this? And if they did allow audio to be recorded with proxies in the app, wouldn't work here. And when I do screen recordings, they're mute. How much would a microphone have cost? One thing I haven't really talked about is the app. There is no reason why the Fly app cannot have additional features for each drone connected. After all, the Go 4 app was different when used with the Spark than when used with the Mavic 2 Pro. I actually don't hate the Fly app at all. I think it's actually nice and much more streamlined. The Go 4 app is very messy and cluttered. It's the missing features from the app that I have the problem with, and I don't think they are Fly app related. I mean, after all, the Fly app is called the DJI Go version 5 in the RC Pro's Android directory structure. I don't think I've ever made a review about anything where I've talked so much about negatives, probably more than the positives. Normally, I just don't waste my time. It's just that 3 has the potential to be really great, and most of the issues are fixable. I doubt my review will prompt these to get fixed, but I really do hope DJI watch it and take on board what I've said. And I really hope it doesn't stop them sending me review models in the future, as I do love reviewing their drones. I've just never been one of these everything is awesome type reviewers that we have so many of. After all, I have been reviewing cameras and camera gear on YouTube since 2008, and I wouldn't still be around if I was one of those. One thing I've mentioned in passing a few times, but not directly addressed, and that is the very controversial pricing of 3.
The price of the original Mavic Pro, and this is the basic package and not the Fly More, is $1,000. The Mavic 2 Pro was, got my prices here, I need to look at them, was $1,500. And this one, we have lots of prices, we have lots of versions, $2,200. And that's just the craft, the controller, and 1 battery. You got the Fly More combo, and that's going to be $3,000. That gives you, I think, 1 set of the NDs, the bag, 3 batteries, craft controller. And if you want to buy the Cine package, then that's almost $5,000. So it's $2,000 more. And what do you get for that? You get the controller, which costs on its own $1,200. You get 2 sets of NDs. You get the bag, 3 batteries, the internal SSD, and ability to record ProRes HQ. So it's up to you whether you think, if you want that remote controller, which is very nice, whether you want to pay that extra $800 to get the ProRes ability to have the full Cine thing, and also so you can get Cine etched on the arm there, so everybody knows that you've just spent $5,000 on a consumer drone.
This is not a slow on 3 at all. After all, DJI called 3 a consumer drone on its website. The only professional drone that they list is the Inspire 2. So what exactly is a consumer drone? I've no idea, because the line between consumer and professional camera gear is so blurred these days I couldn't tell you. Drones are a bit more complicated though, down to the whole thing called the law. I want to touch on the new laws that we have here, as they will affect DJI moving forward, and I'm sure a number of other countries will have very similar things as well. The Civil Aviation Authority is in charge in the UK, and there is now no longer any distinction between commercial and non-commercial flying. Any drone that is sold and flown after January 2023 will need to be classified to adhere to the new laws. You'll also need to pass a very easy online multiple choice test to get a fly number, and then pay £9 a year to be a drone operator. Yes, even for the Mini and Mini 2. Classifications will apply to other countries, not just the UK, and no drones have been classified yet. We know some of the requirements right now, but not all of them. But once they are finalised and given classifications, that determines where and how you can use them. Here in the UK, where the drones which have already been released can be retrospectively classified, will be down to the Department for Transport, the CAA and the manufacturers. But if it just comes down to software modifications, it is possible. In January 23, if you have a classified drone, things will simply become a lot easier and clearer for you. As the transitional period that we're in right now is a bit complicated, I'm going to go over a little bit here, but not much. I recommend heading over to heliguy.com, where they explain things very well. In the low risk open category, to fly anything other than a Mini or Mini 2, you'll need an A2 COFC. I did mine with Heliguy, and I thoroughly recommend them. And as I said, there's no distinction between commercial and hobbyist anymore. You still will need this. Right now, if you fly a drone which is under 500 grams and you have this A2 COFC, you can fly with the least restrictions in the same way that you can with the Mini 2. But from 500 to 2 kilograms, you can only fly in the more restrictive A2 subcategory. This is where 3 currently falls, and you need your A2 COFC here as well. You see, the classification that DJI want for 3 is Class 1. This is the golden ticket. Amongst many things that we know is it does need to weigh less than 900 grams. If 3 can be retrospectively classified, you'll be able to fly in the A1 open subcategory, the one with the least restrictions for fun and for commercial use. And you won't even need an A2 COFC. I do recommend getting one if you are looking to do commercial flying, because you'll need it for other things and for moving forward. I won't go into anything else here, just head to Heliguy if you want to learn more. But one thing to be aware of is if your drone is 250 grams or more and not classified come 2023, it will be considered a legacy drone and can only be flown in the most restrictive A3 subcategory. which is 150 meters from any uninvolved person, building, recreational space, etc. Which is basically going to be the situation for most drones out there. And the big worry for DJI is not being able to retrospectively classify their drones, especially 3. Maybe this is why we have a Mavic 3 and not a Mavic 3 Pro? Maybe the Mavic 3 Pro is being held back for when these classifications are finalized and it can be given one. That's just paranoia. I'm sure that's not going to happen. It really is a strange time for the drone industry, and the next 12 months will be really interesting to see how things turn out. And I hope they turn out well, because flying drones is just the best fun you can have with a camera.
Look, come here. Nobody likes criticism, and it's not criticising you, it's just some of the decisions that have been made. I think you're fantastic. The main things, you're really good. And I will use you. I want you to come home. Come on, mate. It's cold out here. You'll really like it at home. There's lots of your kind, you'll get on really well. That's better. Come on. Come on. Hope you like cats. Look, you don't need to show off. I get it, okay? I'm sure you can make it through there. Oh, 3. You didn't need to show off, you silly thing. Come here. Let's get you home. Oh, you silly 3.